Hi there. Okay, I think that's now working. Yeah, hopefully, if someone in the chat could just let me know if you can hear me, because I just completely broke my microphone. You can hear me, good. Welcome back to my live stream around doing some Node-RED development work. This is going to be the last stream of the year. Great to see you guys in the chat. Hi Softy2K, Jim Bob Scolchi, great to have you back. So I missed last week. I wasn't feeling 100%, and well, frankly, after a long day of struggling through a migraine all day, didn't fancy more time in front of the screen to stream at the end of the day. So took a break, and I'd really planned to take this week off, but I thought as I missed last week, I'll come do one tonight, but this will be the last one, and I'll pick it back up sometime in January. Don't know exactly when, but it'll be back up in January. So keep an eye on the Twitch stream. I'll tweet about it when I know when I'm back up to speed. But yeah, so it's been it's been an interesting year. It continues to be an interesting year. What are we doing tonight? Well, I've been doing some work around plugins. Now, I know I spoke about plugins 2 weeks ago on the last live stream and some of the concepts behind it. Essentially, that's what I'm still focused on my work on, and going to, unlike previous streams, I am technically actually on holiday. So this is about the first, this is the first time I've sat in front of my laptop since last week. Since about 5 minutes ago, so more or less. So I'm coming to this slightly cold, but a bit of a recap, that would be good. So what are plugins? So the idea here is trying to have a way that people can write bits of code to plug in to add features to Node-RED, which don't involve adding a node to the palette. Right now you can do it today by sort of piggybacking on the node modules. So you create a dummy node, maybe a config node, so it doesn't even show up in the palette, but that gives you a way to get some code run inside the editor. So if you wanted to add a custom sidebar or some other custom thing, you could do that today through that mechanism, but it's a bit of a hack. And what we want to do with the plugins mechanism is give a bit more of a formalized way to create features that can be added into Node-RED to extend it, and but also have them layer up. So the example I talked a bit about 2 weeks ago was the lint tool that is being worked on in the community. So linters are well understood things in the programming world. It looks at your code and can flag up things that don't look right rather. You can set up custom rules for what flows should do. It can make recommendations, that type of stuff. So we've got a linter on its way in the near future, but it wants to be able to add, for example, a custom sidebar to the editor to be able to show the lint results, but it also wants to be able for people to write their own custom rules. So it has its own plugin framework, essentially, of the core linter plus then additional rules that can be added to it. So the plugin mechanism of Node-RED needs to be flexible enough to have this idea of how can you have a plugin that adds the basic linter, for example, but then allow other plugins to actually be plugins for Node-RED that contribute to the Node-RED linter. So that's the basic concept of what the plugins are. It's really just formalizing a way of packaging code to get it loaded into the runtime and editor. Now, for those who've been around for a while with the project and kept track of what we've talked about in the project, you may recall one of the items we had in the release plan for 1.0 was a pluggable library mechanism. So this was a way to make it possible in the, for example, the import and export dialogues to have other sources of where flows could be imported from or exported to. And as a concept, I saw that as being, we wanted it to be quite flexible in that we wanted it to be, we didn't want to restrict it to just the types of library source that we wrote. We wanted to make it, like the other pluggable bits of Node-RED that we already have, allow others to write their own plugins for it. So it wasn't, the pluggable library stuff wasn't really high on the to-do list. It sort of dropped off 1.0 and it hadn't quite got back on the list. But it occurred to me, whilst I've been working on the plugins work, it would be useful to be developing a user of the plugins system alongside it. So I've actually made a start on the library plugins. So perhaps I'll just briefly show you a bit of that in action. 2 weeks off and I can't remember what buttons to click. Main screen. Here we are. And like I said, this is the first time I've sat in front of my laptop, and I can't remember where I've got everything at the moment. So what stream of code have I even got on here? I've got external modules at the moment. Right, I'm just gonna, okay, I'm literally just trying to remember what I was doing on Friday when I moved off this, but we're going to go to the library plugins branch. So this is on GitHub if you wanted to play with it. The library plugins branch. Let's just get that running. So in the Node-RED, in this branch, in the code base, there is a test directory, resources, plugin. And this test plugin is where I'm basically throwing plugins and features of plugins as I test and develop them. And what I've created here is a very rudimentary plugin. Let's make this a bit bigger. And what the library plugin thing proposes, it's still just sort of a high level proposal at the moment, is I can register a plugin and I've given it the name Node-RED Library File Store, and it's of type Node-RED Library Source. Okay, and that type's important. I'll come back to that in a sec. And then it has this class property which points up to this JavaScript class object, which defines an API with an init, get entry, save entry. The API is part of the ongoing work to design. But I mean, this is kind of the magic bit. We register this plugin and we say it's of type Node-RED Library Source. So if I go into the Runtime Library code, no, not that one, into the Runtime Library code. So this is the library component in the core runtime. So it sets up a listener to the registry plugin added event. So this gets called whenever a plugin registers. So whenever someone calls red.plugins.register plugin, it will emit this registry plugin added event. And what this code does is it looks to see whether that plugin has a type field and is the type of Node-RED Library Source. If it is, it's one we care about. It's one that this library component cares about, and it goes and grabs it, grabs reference to it. What it then does is, let me pull up. If I pull up my settings file, what we've done so far in this pull request, because there's a draft pull request with all this code, is added support somewhere in here under editor theme to have a library section. And under that library section, you can have sources. And here I'm saying I want to have a library source and give it the ID team dir, as in team directory, with a name of my team dir, and it's of type Node-RED library file store. And that is the ID of the plugin I registered, Node-RED library file store. Oops. So this is basically saying I want to have an instance of Node-RED library file store, give it an icon of FA cab, just from the Font Awesome selection, and a path. So where on the local file system will it use? So /temp/nrlib. Now, if you look at the actual class that implements it, I've not written the code to actually implement the file store. It just logs if it's getting called correctly. Because at the moment this is not a real implementation, this is me just testing all this stuff works. So having got this library sources, if I now, what the code does, if we fire up, reload the editor, now if I bring up, for example, the import dialog, you'll notice in the left-hand column, which you're used to seeing the library and examples, my team dir is now there. So by having that in my settings file, it's now listed here as a new library source I can be using. So it shows up there. If I bring up the export dialog, it's there. If I bring up a function node, for example, and use its library, you'll see my team dir gets listed there as well. It's empty, but yeah, but we could start using that library if I'd actually implemented the API for real. So this is really cool. It's a lot of the groundwork for having pluggable library sources, and so yeah, this is where that pull request has got to. I need to implement a proper file store plugin. We already have a lot of that code because obviously we already have the local library that writes into your Node-RED user directory. So one of the things I'm trying to work through is, can we just reuse that code, or is there a way to make the local library an instance of this plugin, and yeah, just maximize code reuse that way. So yeah, why is this interesting? I mean, one of the use cases that comes up from time to time is when you have a team collaborating, everyone's developing on their own local version of Node-RED, but they want to quickly share resources between their team. Well, that team could now set up a extra library source using a folder shared on Dropbox or Google Drive, or it's a local network share, whatever it might be. But that would be a quick and easy way then for that team to share assets amongst themselves, just as easy as importing and exporting from the editor. No more having to cut and paste an email or whatever, or manually doing it. So yeah, really neat. And then it does open the other possibility that you could have other sources of library. So one of the concepts it does support is a read-only library. So you'll notice if I do an import, I have local examples, my team dir. If I do an export, I don't have the examples library. And that's because in the code, here you can see the definitions now of those two libraries, the local library and the examples library. The examples library is flagged as read-only, so it only appears when we're doing an import. We don't show the examples library when we're doing an export. So you could one of the interesting stores would be an HTTP based one if we define not like a WebDAV type API, but a simple API, REST API for browsing a remote library. Then again, people could create custom repositories of nodes. Could this even hook into the Flow library? I don't know. There's interesting scaling issues with that, but or GitHub or whatever. Anyway, it's the possibilities this opens up, which I find really quite cool. At the moment, it does, to add these extra sources, you've got to edit your settings file and restart Node-RED. So they're sort of statically defined, which is fine, for version 1 or version 1 of this feature, whenever this feature ships. Then I suspect that is going to be good enough initially, but I'm also building within mind in this export nodes dialog, for example. Imagine having a little plus button down here that you can click, and then it prompts you if you want to add a new source, and it can give you a list of the types of library source it supports, so file store, whatever, and then depending which one you select, it could automatically generate a UI. So if I go so the file store plugin has an HTML file that goes alongside it, which does a registration just like it did in the runtime, but does it in the editor as well. And this is stuff I'm still playing with. None of this does anything at the moment, but this is me playing with the what if type of exploration of the problem, saying that the library file store has a defaults array, a defaults object, just like nodes do. I'm trying to keep it similar conceptually with name and path, so that when the user came in here and clicked the button to add a new instance of that library, we could generate the UI. At this point, I don't see us going to the extent of the completely bespoke edit dialogues that nodes can have. We could go there, but I'm not rushing to go there. If it's got simple key value pairs, we can generate that, prompt the user for give this library source a name, and if it's a file store, then we also want to have a path property. So you can set it all up from within the editor, which will be good for the sort of the cloud-hosted instance of Node-RED when you can't muck around with your settings file. Just adds some more flexibility. So that's plugins. That's the library plugin. How much further the library plugin stuff goes, I don't know at the moment. We've got 1.3 coming, hopefully end of January, very early February. Suddenly want to have the plugins work mature enough for 1.3, but it would be nice to have a feature rolling out in 1.3 that makes use of it. So I suspect the plugins, the file store plugin for the library will exist, and you'll be able to statically configure them in your settings file. Now, another activity around all of this, though, is the plugins work. And one of the things we're looking at is around restricting what modules can be loaded into the runtime. So this is, we've got the basic feature of plugins working, but part of doing it right is making sure we consider all the different use cases, and we know there are users of Node-RED, not individual end users, but sort of the companies who adopt it, who run it in their environments, who would want the ability to have more control over what a user installs. And so at the moment, you can go some way by disabling the palette manager. We do have a node setting called nodes excludes, which is a bit of a clumsy setting where you can list file names that the runtime will refuse to load. it dates from when, it predates from when you could package modules as nodes as modules, when it was literally a case of dropping a JavaScript and HTML file into a directory. So it's clunky and it's just inelegant. So we want to improve it. So what this discussion is around on GitHub is around, and let me just get recent, where was I? Git check out external modules. We basically want to have better control over what modules the runtime is prepared to load or even install, because there is another feature on its way that will allow you to install npm modules and access them in the function node. So beyond just node modules, if you want to use a particular npm module inside a function node today, you can do it if you manually install it and use your settings file to export it to your function nodes. We're going to build in a way that you can do that directly from the editor, but we know not everyone wants their end users to be able to just freely install code. So at the moment we've got let's see, I think this is where we've ended up. We're going to I'm trying to remember, because I'm sure I think I started writing another reply to this, which I didn't finish on Friday before I got distracted by the kids. So I may remember some further tweaks, but what we're going to have in 1.3 is we're going to deprecate some of the settings we already have, and we're going to sort of centralize the settings we have around what can be installed to this new property called external modules. Now, I remember starting to write a comment saying I've gone cold on the idea of having external because it feels a bit redundant. But anyway, we'll stick with the name for the moment, and then have basically all of the settings around what can be done in the runtime brought under this one place. So allow palette install, so that will affect whether the palette manager is enabled or not and the corresponding APIs. Allow module install will be for the APIs for installing generic npm modules and exposing them in the function node. Auto install is one we already have around automatically installing modules that we know we need but we can't find, used in cloud environments that have to reinstall every now and then for reasons. In the last release we added support for uploading TGZ files for the palette, and that has a setting elsewhere, but we're going to deprecate where it is elsewhere and standardize it here. And then what's the important, the key part of this are now going to be the allow list and deny list. So we want to be able to give a Node-RED administrator, and this is how I think of it. We've got to separate out. I mean, I'm sure many of you watching this are individual Node-RED users who you are your own administrator and user, but a lot of this work is making sure Node-RED is fit for use in other environments, and part of that is thinking, what can the Node-RED administrator do to control what the Node-RED developer can do for environments when they need to have that control. So we're going to have allow list and deny list, which gives the ability for the administrator to set up some rules as to what can and can't be installed in the runtime, and what the runtime is willing to load. And it'll be quite simple. I think there's some examples in here from Nishiyama-san. Where was it? Yeah. So for the allow list, you could be very restrictive and say to give quite precise module names and even version strings, or you could be quite open on maybe you trust everything published by a particular organization on npm, and then the deny list works in exactly the same way. So I think we need to think a little bit more about how this would work in practice, as this is going to apply both to node modules and npm modules. I suspect so there are going to be the people who want to lock things down incredibly. So effectively the deny list would become star, as in everything is denied unless it is on the allow list. And then you'd have to list the Node-RED nodes that are the Node-RED nodes that are loaded. You see, now I'm thinking, okay, sorry, I've distracted myself by a question Nishiyama-san had asked me in this discussion that I'm not going to go off on a tangent on now, but I've just realised he made a very good point that I need to go back on. But yeah, now it might be, for example, in the deny list, you want to deny very specific versions of specific modules, whatever it might be. Basically, we need to have the ability. There might be certain modules that are identified to be might clash. We know there are some clones of Node-RED Dashboard that clash with Node-RED Dashboard. So you could add those to the deny list to prevent them being installed because you want the user to use Node-RED Dashboard, for example, and so on. So yeah, so I'm currently in the midst of having identified this new set of properties, then going through and updating the internal code to be updating internal code to deprecate the old settings in favor of these new settings. And yeah, that's what I was thinking of doing, carrying on. I don't know how interesting it is actually going to be, because I just need to think through a bit more. Like I said, the thought I just had with mentioned something, a point Nishiyama made that I need to go back on. That's actually okay. My goal here was, we had this bunch of settings to control the palette manager, and they were slightly spread across the settings file. So I wanted to pull those together into one place. So if we scroll up this discussion, you can see, where was it? Yeah, you can see it started out being just trying to set the rules for installing anything. So allow install, auto install, allow upload, allow and deny lists. And that means deprecating editor theme.palette.editable in place for the external modules.allow install. Now, that kind of makes sense to me, because editor theme is meant to be about adding features, or the theme of the editor, customizing the editor. And whilst it's true to say palette editable false to disable the palette manager in the editor, it also disables the admin API for it. So it's one of these features that a lot of it, the settings had ended up in the editor configuration, whereas actually it's more importantly about what the runtime allows. Does the runtime allow you to edit the palette? So yeah, we're going to deprecate editor theme palette editable. The auto install one we currently have is auto install modules, and we have editor theme palette upload, which we only just added in the last release, major release. But again, it's going to move in as well. Now, this is what I enjoy about this stream. it forces me. Well, I spend this time, whether it's interesting to you guys or not, talking through the work I'm doing and talking through from first principles in some cases some of these designs. And in doing that, I do stumble across problems. And as I've been speaking, that's exactly what I've done. I've stumbled across a problem with our proposal. So there is a separate design around being able to install and manage npm modules for the function node. And the user can install, remove, update npm modules from the editor UI is the concept. And they can, by doing it through that means, those modules are then made available in the function node, so you can use them, whether they are pre-required into the function node or you can use require. I think the idea is you also give a global name that you want that module to be exposed as, and so you don't have to do require. And then the idea with the allow list, deny list would be, well, that kind of makes sense. Do you want the user to be able to access the file system module in the function node, or do you want to restrict down to a much more specific list of modules that they want to install? Now that's all good, and my goal here being to collapse it all down into one set of properties, one allow list, one deny list, and have that work for both those modules, but also the node modules would be prepared to load. But as I've talked through it, that's going to be a really horrible feature to actually make use of, because it may well be you want them to be able to install any third-party nodes they want, but you want to restrict what they can expose and make use of directly in the function node. Well, how would you go about writing the allow list and deny list for that? Because you're not going to write an allow list with close to 3,000 third-party nodes listed just in case the user wants to install it. It might be you're running an environment where you have a curated list, and you might be able to do something like that. But yeah, it feels impractical to say. Well, it seems perfectly reasonable to say the allow and deny list might be different for third-party for nodes being added versus arbitrary modules being loaded into the function node. And Nishiyama-san, who's leading the work on the function node side, did ask whether these settings ought to be by type of thing being loaded, and I had suggested I disagreed, and I thought no, I think having one list for both would make more sense. But now I talk it through, he's perfectly right. I think we need to split this out. We need to split this out for the function node modules and then for the palette modules. So yeah, okay, so maybe rather than writing some code, and I don't know what you guys are here to watch, whether you want to see me dive into code, but I want to sketch some ideas for what could this setting actually look like, given given what I've described, which I hope has been fairly coherent. So and this is what I spend, when we're doing this sort of design, I spend so much time just sketching out ideas of writing down what would it look like. It's like drawing a picture of sketching up a design of something you want to make out of wood, what have you. You just sketch ideas, and you can throw away ideas cheaply when they're on paper before you've actually invested the time building it for real. So this is me just sketching out what would it mean actually if we treat the palette as a separate entity to the function node modules. And it's not just the function node that might want this. We're trying to design it so that third-party nodes could allow their users to dynamically add modules as well. So yeah, trying to build it so it isn't specific to the function node, but clearly I think the function node is going to be the primary user of it. So I think this is a key point. It's one thing to be allowed to npm install something. It's another for the runtime to then expose it to a function node or to load it into the runtime as a node module. What have we got? We want essentially we've got these 5 properties. Do you want them to be installable, to allow the user to install? Do you want them to be able to upload tgz files, which I think is questionable on the module side. Frankly, I find it a bit questionable on the palette side, but that was some requirements to support that, but that's okay. Auto install, so if the runtime starts up and finds it's missing, should it reinstall it or not? And then allow and deny list. So this isn't. So I was thinking of it in terms of what would we let. Would we prevent you calling npm install at all? And whilst the goal here would be to stop the call to npm install from happening, I think it is clear there are two different rules here. There is the rule of something I'm going to install because I'm going to load as a node module, and something I'm going to install because I'm going to load as a function node module. And believe me, the more I talk about nodes and modules, trying to distinguish between the many different things a node could be and many different things a module could be, I understand it in my head, but I kind of wish we'd picked some different terms for some of these things. But I do wonder whether splitting them out, maybe having external modules and then settings for the palette and settings for the modules. I do wonder auto install, whether it needs to be separate or I'm just trying to find in my head, are there scenarios where you'd want to enable one but not the other? And I say it seems perfectly reasonable that say for example you've got a custom catalog of nodes, so you don't let users install from the public catalog. You provide a restricted catalog that they can access in the tool. Then you'd want to make the palette installable, but you don't want to go anywhere near the third part, the installing arbitrary node modules. So yeah, they do need to be possible to enable separately. Auto install, it kind of feels, well, if it's missing when Node-RED starts, you're going to need to install it, whether it's a node or a module that a node depends on. So I think auto install is almost a top level thing, I think. But am I just trying to I don't know whether that should be a top level thing or not. But that already feels, whilst I was trying to collapse it down into as simple a set of properties as possible, I think this now feels a bit more coherent. Now, I talked briefly about, do I have it open? Yes, I do. Editor theme. Oh, okay, I don't have it in here. Sorry, let me just... So one of the things we... So the setting I've said would be deprecating, or a couple of them would be deprecating, is this editor theme palette editable. Sorry, jumping around a lot as I try and get to the right place. So today, you can do something like this, and that's what we'd be deprecating, is doing editor theme palette editable and upload. And that's because, as I say, it's bigger than just the editor functionality. It would also be the admin APIs. Now, something else I know we have in here, and I can't remember if it's catalogs spelt like that or like that. Something else we support in here is being able to specify the URLs of other nodes, node catalogs. So the palette manager in the editor will load this rather than the main sort of the public flow library catalog we provide. Now, if we're deprecating these guys in favor of the external modules one, what about catalogs? Does that go with it? Now, I don't think it does, because this is back to, the runtime doesn't make use of this property at all. This is purely something customizing the editor, so it does kind of feel like it belongs. Yeah, and this is where I am torn, because there's a cleanliness, a purity to pulling it out like this to a top level property, but as ever there are sort of grey areas where it's less clear cut that pulling it out is the right thing to do. But no, I think in the interests of so given the current proposal, which is this top block, which has allow palette install, allow module install, allow palette up, these properties have all got quite convoluted by having to specify what they're referring to in it. There is a cleanliness to having this structure, and yeah, it's naming things. Naming things is hard. Just so I'm now saying, well, is it sensible having? Do we need to have the allow word in? The allow install and allow upload. Before we had it as editable, which because it was the palette manager. Is that what we call it? Manage palette feature. That's probably okay. Allow install, allow upload. So yeah, I think that does feel better, and I need to go back to Nishiyama-san to pivot yet again on this design. But my plan had been to actually spend some time implementing some of this with you tonight, but as often happens, I spend so much time talking through what we're doing. I don't often get to the code, but I hope it's still useful. I hope it's still interesting. It's kind of, I'm very aware it can be quite hard to follow what we're doing in the project, because unless you're following the issues or the design discussions or the conversations we have on Slack, then it can be quite hard to follow. And that's something I want to try and improve in the new year, is how can we make it easier for people to see what we're doing, even though it is all open source, it is all out there. It's just because it's open source, you've got to sort of piece. It's like a puzzle, and you've got to find the right pieces and put together in the right way. And I'm sure there's more we could do to make life easier. But that does feel better. I'm now questioning this top level name of external modules, whether it wants to be, what else could it be? It's to do with the installer, so it could be installer. What else could it be? I mean, external modules. The phrase external modules came from the Nishiyama-san's work on the function node, which was about external modules being distinct from internal modules, the modules loaded into the palette. So it could just be modules, but then if it was modules, then we've got this slightly weird modules. If we call the top level modules, then we've got the palette, which I hope is reasonably clear that refers to the nodes in the palette. But then we've got modules.modules, which, it's like, yes, the modules, but not those modules, it's those modules. Or are they those modules? Like I said, it'd be nice to have a few more words to use in our vocabulary around this. But yeah, which is why I wondered, we're talking about the ability to install modules and load them. So installer, is that so? Rather than call it external modules, I'll just go back to that, which is the thing these settings are about. What about if it's the settings of the component and the thing that does the work rather than the things that are being installed? I don't know. And it's a well-trodden joke that naming things in computer science is hard. The three things, the three hard problems of computer science are naming things and off by one errors. Those are the three. Packages. Because I guess, packages. It's funny because NPM, they're the node package manager, but we call them NPM. They're called node modules, but we use the node package manager to manage your packages, and it's package.json, but package.json installs modules. So even in even in the NPM world, Yarn world, what have you, you've got this slightly confusion over what's a module, what's a package. What if it was packages at the top level? Then, don't do that. Yeah, that's an idea. And the other, just to seed some more fun into the debate, I spent ages at the beginning of tonight talking about plugins. And plugins are things that you npm install into the runtime, and they get loaded in using the same mechanisms as loading nodes, but they aren't nodes, and they don't go into the palette. Now, in this current structure, plugins would be covered by the palette section, even though they're not nodes. Which, just adds to the confusion. There's then part of me wondering, well, should I concede the function node functionality we're looking at is going to be pretty much, whilst we're trying to build it so other nodes could take advantage of it, it's likely to be pretty unique to the function node. So what if function modules, I Don't save. So you've got packages.palette, packages function modules. Then, do you then also have a plugins section? And where that gets hard, very hard, and I almost don't want to make life difficult for myself, because I'm the one writing this code, is at load time, a npm package could contain both nodes and plugins. So if it can contain both, and if we have separate allow and deny lists for plugins and palette nodes, then we have to what do we have to do? We have to if you had a module that provided both a node and a plugin, you'd have to make sure it's in both allow lists. Or if you wanted to deny both, you'd have to be in both deny lists. Or maybe just having it in one is sufficient. If you can't partially load a module, so if we find it on the deny list, then we will refuse to load it. Given that I'm I like the name palette because it's consistent with the editor theme setting we already have. I think it's pretty understandable. But challenge your ideas. I've been staring at that word so long. It's how words lose meaning when you stare at them too long. I can just now see it saying palette. Is that even spelt right? Is that how you spell it? See, oh man, I need a holiday. I'm on holiday. What am I thinking? I don't know. It needs staring at some more. But I spend so much time going in circles on some of these designs. At some point, you've just got to stick a stake in the ground and say, right, let's go with something. Spend some more time. Spend time rather than staring at it. Spend some time implementing it and feeling it and using it and get that sense. So, I think this is a great example of that. So, if you are interested, let me show you where we're having this discussion. Because if you have ideas, if you're watching the replay or then want to share some input and you want to leave a comment, then by all means leave a comment on the YouTube video, in the Twitch chat now, if you're watching it live. But if you want to get if you want to see where this discussion is actually happening, then so we've got the Node-RED designs repo, which is where we try and document the actual high-level designs we're doing. So you'll see in the pull requests here, we've got the plugins design work, the library plugins, all the stuff I've talked about. But we've now, as of a couple of weeks ago, we now have the discussions tab. So this is a new feature that GitHub have had. They've had it in sort of limited beta for most of this year, but a couple of weeks ago they've now made it available to everyone, and we've enabled it on our designs repo, so we can have design discussions around specific points that don't warrant a big design note write-up or what have you. So if you go to the discussions tab, this is we're not replacing the discourse forum with this by any means. So discourse remains the end user discussion forum. What I want to get to the point of is people working on the core of Node-RED and collaborating on the core design stuff. We can have our discussions here without answering people's questions about how to change the font of Node-RED dashboard every 5 minutes, that type of stuff. So in here, if you want to get involved with any suggestions you have, once I'm done on the stream, I'll just dump in my latest thoughts and what I've talked through, so Nishiyama-san can see that. But yeah, so Jimbob, so packages.node-red and packages.external, yeah, so putting the node-red name in to distinguish there are modules. The challenge is you can't have hold on, can you not? Yeah, you can't have a hyphen in a property name without quoting it. So aesthetically it fails the test of it fails that test that you can't do node-red, and yeah, I'm not going to get into that game of what do we then call it. What did we have it? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, a delve into my brain of naming stuff. That's where things are at. I'll be poking away at this slowly over the next 2 weeks. As I am actually on holiday, and it's one of those weird things, for a lot of open source projects, people contribute to in their spare time, and when they take holiday, they'll still tinker and they'll still contribute. It's spare time, fun activity. Well, because I work on Node-RED as my actual job, whilst in days gone by of the project, holiday would be a chance for me to get even more done because I wouldn't have my day job to do. I'm actually on vacation, and whilst I will be doing bits and pieces of Node-RED stuff, I'm not planning to spend all my time on it. Although, with renewed restrictions on what we're allowed to do in the UK, it may well be I find I have more time in the house rather than being out and about than I had necessarily planned for. So we'll see. We'll see how we get on. But the plan is 1.3 in late January. So, there's stuff to do to get a good 1.3 release together. There's a bunch of stuff has landed recently from Hitachi, which is great, around using the complete node that we introduced a while ago with more of the core nodes. So they've added support for that, which is useful. That's going to lead to some other cool stuff around managed shutdown of flows. Whether that's in 1.3 or not, we'll wait and see. And yeah, I would hope the function node stuff is in 1.3. I know the Hitachi guys would like it in 1.3, but it kind of depends on getting it done, getting it tested. So it may well be we'll get the 1.3 beta done in late January and do the proper release of 1.3 in February. I think that's a realistic time frame given where we're at and it's holiday time. So yeah. And then this plugin stuff. I mean, there's just so many interesting things we could do with plugins. So one of the areas I'm also playing around with at the moment, just as more of a thought experiment rather than anything else, is what else in the editor could actually be pulled out of core and put into a plugin. What are the features in the editor that we would want? Would it be reasonable to say someone who wants to embed Node-RED and repurpose it for their own uses doesn't want that feature? So one way of allowing you to disable a feature would be pulling that feature out into a plugin that the default Node-RED module would include, so you still, you guys installing Node-RED would still get those features, but someone would be able to take individual components of the editor and do a bit more of a pick and mix of what features. So a good example would be the context sidebar. That is a very self-contained piece of work in the editor and the admin API to provide to back that. What if that were a plugin, for example? Another area which I'm quite intrigued by and I want to explore some more is the debug sidebar. And some interesting ideas around allowing people to create custom message handlers for the debug sidebar, so that, for example, if a message contains a buffer that is an image, have a plugin for the debug sidebar that renders the image, or draws the image, rather than just gives you the raw buffer in the sidebar. Or if it's if you're working with historical data, maybe have a plugin that gives you a little graph in the debug sidebar so you can plot values over time. Straying into dashboard territory, but I think there's some really interesting tools to create, whether it's debug sidebar or a new custom sidebar around data science, data visualization. They seen some nice concepts around using Node-RED to do data science and thinking about what are the other features you need to go alongside it, and part of that is visualization. And if you're a data scientist wanting to work with some data and run experiments on it, you don't really want to have to create a dashboard just to see a graph of your data. If there was a sidebar that you could plumb into to see your data automatically do the right thing. I don't know. Some really interesting ideas. The key thing is getting the plugins feature right would enable people to create plugins to extend the Node-RED editor to do extra stuff without having to hack it. We've seen, we know there's the image, I forget the module name now, there is the node that lets you view images on the workspace of Node-RED itself as the messages flow through. It's one of those, I can see it's really useful, but the purist in me does not like, because it really does hack into how nodes are drawn, and that is something we've never exposed as any sort of API, and completely reserve the right to completely change how we draw the UI. But we know there have been asked questions about being able to customize what the nodes look like. So again, the plugins system would be a way for people to plug in a custom node renderer, for example. If you want, if you want your nodes to be random shapes, or you want circles or triangles, whatever it might be, well, someone could create a plugin that provides a custom piece of code that knows how to render a node. I mean, we would have to define the API to call it, so it knows what to do. But once we've got plugins, I'm quite excited by the experimentation that people can start doing. And there's part of me that just has to accept that people will experiment and do things I don't like, but that's irrelevant whether I like it or not. Once it's a plugin, as long as they're using the APIs we provide, then it's a good thing that people are building new and interesting things with Node-RED, and that's what I'm really excited about next year. Just seeing what can we do to enable more people to do fun stuff with Node-RED, and fun customizations, fun extensions, and as I've said, it's sort of increased adoption around it. But there we are. That's it for tonight. I hope that was useful. I hope that was interesting. I say, not much code wrangling as ever, but a walkthrough of some of the work we're doing and some of the interminable naming challenges when you come to designing stuff. But with that, I'm going to sign off. So thank you to everyone who has watched, joined the stream live over the past however many weeks. I think, is it 22, 23 weeks? Having missed the odd one. Thank you to everyone who has spent the time to watch me prattle on about the work I do. I enjoy it. I know it's I do prattle on like I am now because I'm trying to find something. I'm just intrigued to see how many streams I've done. Let's just find Twitch archive. there are 23 videos, and yeah, so this is the 24th live stream I've done. I didn't know if I'd do more than a couple when I started it earlier in the year, so certainly plan to keep going. Thank you to everyone who has watched and commented. Thank you to those of you that it's inspired you to raise a pull request. We've had 2 or 3 come through, which is awesome to see. I hope more of you will consider that at some point. I really do encourage you to get involved if you're interested. Yeah, and as ever, do like and subscribe if you're on YouTube. We'll keep putting them up there, and have a great end of 2020. There's only 10 days left. What else could possibly happen in those 10 days? He says, haha. Yeah, and all the best. Happy holidays if that's your thing for the Christmas break, and wishing you the very best for the new year. And I will be back in early to mid-January. So I don't know exactly when, but I will be back. So thanks everyone, and good night.